What would you do if an HOA stormed onto your private pier 5 minutes after you moved in and ordered you to tear it down? I had just moved into my lakeside home when the HOA stormed onto my private pier, shouting that I had to tear it down immediately. They were convinced they controlled the marina, the water, and the future of this land. What they didn't know was one simple thing: the ground they were standing on already belonged to me, and from that moment on, everything they built their power on began to unravel. 5 minutes after the moving truck left my waterfront estate, an HOA president in a bright pink suit stormed onto my private pier, screaming that it violated community marina rules. She pointed at my boats, my dock, and the emerald lake behind me like she already owned it. I stood there calmly, watching her rage echo across the water. The quiet I'd been chasing for years lasted exactly 5 minutes. When the movers finally shut the rear door of the truck, the sound was a clean, metallic thump that echoed off the stone seawall and rolled out across the lake. The diesel engine rumbled, tires crunched over gravel, and then the whole thing eased down the long driveway and disappeared behind the line of pines. The air that rushed in after it was fresh and cold, carrying the scent of wet rock, cedar, and the faint sweetness of sun-warmed algae. I stayed on the pier barefoot, toes gripping the cool stone. The pier wasn't fancy, but it was solid. Older stone blocks fitted like a puzzle, with a few hairline cracks where seasons had pushed and pulled. Down below, the water was a deep emerald, clear enough that I could see pale stones and the shadow of a dock ladder wavering with the ripples. A breeze came off the lake and fluttered the palms planted along the lawn like green flags. Somewhere across the marina, a halyard tapped a mast. Tap, 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 steady as a heartbeat. The house behind me was the kind of place that looked like it belonged on a postcard and in a lawsuit at the same time. Elegant, over the water, built on rock foundations that disappeared into the lake. Clean glass lines, wide deck, landscaping that the previous owner had kept almost too perfect. Grass clipped short, coconut palms and ornamentals arranged like a magazine spread. Beyond the private marina, forested hills rose in layers, dark green fading to blue in the distance. I watched a line of yachts bob gently in their slips, white hulls, chrome rails catching sunlight. A few colorful kayaks were stacked near the far dock, bright red and yellow against the gray boards. A pontoon boat drifted lazily near the buoy line, someone on board waving at a friend on shore. It should have felt like an ending. Instead, it felt like the first frame of a movie where something bad is about to walk into the shot. I'd bought the place because I wanted something real. Not another glowing screen, not another contract written in a language meant to confuse you, not another week where the sun rose and set, and I never stepped outside. I'd spent years building a life that made sense on paper and felt like nothing in my hands. When I finally decided to change it, I didn't want a starter home. I wanted space, water, quiet, something that didn't need permission to exist. I had barely turned to head back inside when I heard the sound. Heels, fast, sharp, angry, click, 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 like someone tapping a gavel on stone. I turned and saw them coming down the waterfront, path from the direction of the neighboring development. 3 people marching in a line like they were late for an appointment. The first was a woman in a bright pink suit so vivid it looked almost violent against the calm lake. The jacket was fitted, the pants pressed with a crease sharp enough to cut. Her hair was styled perfectly, like she had an emergency blowout scheduled for disasters. Behind her was a man in his 60s, pale and thin, holding a folder and glancing down at his phone every few steps. The third was a woman with a camera already in her hand, moving like she'd done this before. Chin up, shoulders squared, lens pointed forward. They didn't slow down at the edge of my property line. They didn't stop to read the small wooden sign by the path that said, "Private property, no public access." They stepped onto the stone pier like they were stepping into their own kitchen. The woman in pink didn't even pretend to smile. "That needs to come down," she barked, pointing straight down at the stone beneath my feet. "Immediately." Her finger jabbed the air, then swept outward at my small fishing boat tied to the cleats, at the dock ladder, at the lake itself, and then out toward the marina, rows of slips, yachts, and boats rocking gently behind her. The gesture wasn't just a complaint. It was possession. I blinked once, slowly, not because I didn't understand her words, but because my brain needed a moment to accept the absurdity of someone storming onto a pier they'd never paid for and speaking like they owned the horizon. "Can I help you?" I asked. She snapped her head toward me as if I'd insulted her. "You can start by removing this pier structure and all unauthorized maritime equipment." "Unauthorized?" I repeated, careful, calm. "This is my property." The camera woman raised the lens. I heard the faint electronic click as she took a picture, then another. The man in the back cleared his throat like he wanted to say something, then didn't. The woman in pink pulled a clipboard from her chest like it was a shield. "I'm Bethany Reed, president of the Coastal Haven Homeowners Association." She emphasized the title the way people emphasize rank. "And we need to talk about your immediate compliance with community marina standards." I looked past her at the lake. The sunlight was so bright, it made the surface shimmer. The wind pushed tiny ripples against the rocks below, and I heard water glug softly through a crack in the stone foundation, like the pier itself was breathing. Then I looked back at her. "I just closed on this property 3 weeks ago. There were no HOA covenants attached to the deed." Bethany let out a laugh that was all teeth and no humor. "That's adorable. New people always say that." She stepped forward, heels striking stone near a crack that had been filled with old mortar. "This waterfront is governed by our HOA's marina rules. You don't get to move in and disrupt what we've built here." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move toward her. I just stood there, hands relaxed, letting her show me exactly who she was. "What exactly is your issue?" I asked. Bethany lifted the clipboard and tapped it with a manicured nail. "This pier is non-compliant. The materials are outdated. The design violates aesthetic harmony. And your boat," she flicked her eyes toward the fishing boat as if it smelled, "is encouraging commercial activity." "My boat is a 19-foot fishing boat," I said. "It's tied to my pier." Bethany's eyes narrowed. "Don't play dumb. You know exactly what I mean." The camera woman moved closer, aiming for a better angle of the cracks in the stone. She crouched slightly, zooming in like she'd already decided the story she was going to tell. Bethany inhaled sharply, chest rising, and then she delivered it, clean and sharp like a knife placed on a table. "You have 24 hours. Tear down the pier, remove all watercraft, and cease all marina operations from this property. If you don't, the HOA will pursue enforcement. Fines, legal action, and if necessary, removal performed by HOA-approved contractors at your expense." For a moment, the world went quiet again, but not the peaceful kind. The kind where your ears ring after someone says something that shouldn't be possible. I could hear a distant boat engine idling near the fuel dock. A gull cried out. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a lawn sprinkler clicked on with a soft hiss, spraying mist into sunlight. I looked at Bethany's face, flushed with anger, eyes burning, mouth tight with certainty. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a routine, a script, something she'd done often enough that she expected the world to comply. And the strangest part wasn't her confidence. It was how she pointed at the marina behind her. Rows of slips, yachts, boats, like she owned every inch of water. I felt the question settle in my chest, heavy and cold. Why did she think she could demand my pier? Bethany turned sharply, already done with the conversation. "Document everything," she ordered her companions. We're moving fast on this one." They strode back the way they came, heels clicking, camera snapping, the man still staring at his phone like he was waiting for someone to tell him how this ends. I stayed on the pier alone, staring at the lake that was supposed to be my peace. 24 hours. I hadn't even finished unpacking a single box. But I knew something then. Something I couldn't prove yet. But I could feel it the way you feel a storm coming before the first drop hits. Bethany wasn't just wrong. Bethany was standing on something she didn't understand. The afternoon light shifted as clouds rolled in from the west, dimming the emerald surface of the lake. The breeze picked up, carrying the smell of water and old wood. I finally stepped off the pier and went inside, the glass doors sliding shut behind me with a soft, hollow thud that sounded too final for a house I'd owned less than a month. Inside, the place still felt half borrowed. Cardboard boxes lined the hallway. A stack of unopened mail sat on the kitchen counter. The air carried that faint scent of fresh paint and polished stone that never quite hides the history of a building. I poured myself a glass of water, leaned against the counter, and stared out at the pier through the wide windows. That was when my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar email address. The subject line was written in bold capital letters, like it wanted to shout louder than Bethany had. Notice of violation. Immediate action required. I opened it slowly, already knowing who it was from. The HOA letterhead filled the screen, crest, name, legal disclaimer in small print. The language was clean, formal, and confident in a way that only paperwork written by people who rarely get challenged can be. According to the notice, my pier was situated within HOA-controlled marina access. According to the notice, the presence of my boat constituted unauthorized maritime activity. According to the notice, I was now in violation of multiple HOA bylaws, some of which were referenced only by section number, not description. I read it once, then again, then a third time, slower, the way you read something when you're trying to find the trick. The deadline was the same, 24 hours. Failure to comply would result in daily fines, escalating enforcement, and remedial action conducted by HOA-approved contractors. There was a neat little paragraph explaining that any costs incurred would be billed directly to me and, if unpaid, attached as a lien. I set the phone down and exhaled through my nose. The lake outside hadn't changed. Boats still drifted gently in their slips. A pair of kayaks glided past the far dock, bright colors cutting through the darker water. Somewhere, a motor coughed to life and then settled into a low hum. The disconnect was surreal. The world looked calm, orderly, beautiful. On paper, someone had just declared war on my property. By mid-afternoon, I heard engines again. This time, they didn't stop at the path. A white pickup truck rolled up the gravel drive and parked just short of the lawn. The door swung open, and a tall man climbed out, broad shoulders straining against a faded work shirt. The logo on the door read, Mercer Marine and Construction. The paint cracked and sun-faded like it had been there a long time. Bethany's SUV followed close behind. She stepped out already talking, voice sharp, posture rigid, pink suit immaculate despite the dust. The woman with the camera was there again, lens already uncovered. The older man trailed, behind, folder tucked under his arm, eyes darting from me to the truck to the pier. "Good," Bethany said when she saw me. "You got the notice?" "I did," I replied. "And you understand what's required?" "I understand what you're claiming," I said. "That's not the same thing." Her smile tightened. "That's cute." She waved the contractor forward. "This is Jake Mercer. He's authorized to assess the pier for removal. If you cooperate, we can make this quick." Mercer glanced at me, then at the pier, then back at Bethany. His jaw flexed slightly, like he was chewing on something he didn't like. "You're saying this pier is HOA property?" I asked. Bethany crossed her arms. "Marina access is common area. Always has been. I pulled my phone from my pocket and brought up a photo of my deed, taken straight from the closing documents. I didn't shove it in her face. I just held it out between us. Because this says otherwise. Her eyes flicked down to the screen. Just for a fraction of a second, her confidence wavered. Then it snapped back into place. Deeds don't override HOA authority, she said quickly. You should have reviewed the bylaws before buying. I did, I said. So did my attorney. The man with the folder shifted, cleared his throat. Bethany, maybe we should double-check. She shot him a look that shut him up instantly. This isn't a discussion, she said. It's enforcement. She stepped closer to me, lowering her voice as if we were sharing a secret. You're new. People test boundaries when they move in. That's normal. But this neighborhood has standards, and I protect them. The camera clicked again. Bethany straightened, raised her voice just enough for anyone watching from behind fences or windows to hear. You have until tomorrow. After that, the HOA will proceed. They turned to leave, Mercer lingering a moment longer. He looked back at the pier, then at me. Just make sure you know what you're dealing with, he said quietly, before climbing back into the truck. The vehicles pulled away, dust hanging in the air long after they were gone. I stood there on the lawn, the lake stretching out beyond the pier, the violation notice still glowing on my phone. That's when I noticed it. One line in the document that didn't sit right. A reference to a Marina access map dated years after the pier had already existed. A small inconsistency, buried deep, but glaring once you saw it. I went back inside, pulled the deed from the unopened folder on the counter, and laid it out under the light. Page after page, legal language dense but precise. I compared dates, descriptions, boundaries. Bethany had been loud. The paper was quiet, and the paper didn't agree with her. As the afternoon slid toward evening, the house settled around me. Wood creaked softly as the temperature dropped. Somewhere in the walls, pipes clicked and then went still. Outside, the lake darkened from emerald to deep green, then to a color that looked almost black where the shadows pooled beneath the pier. I carried the deed back out with me and walked down to the water. The pier looked different now, not just like a place to stand, but like a puzzle. I knelt near the edge and ran my fingers along the stone. The blocks weren't decorative. They were load-bearing, stacked with a precision you didn't waste on something temporary. Heavy-duty mooring cleats were bolted into reinforced plates, the kind designed to take strain, not just keep a fishing boat from drifting. I followed the lines with my eyes. Power conduits ran beneath the decking, thicker than anything a residential pier would need. Near the base, a capped fuel line disappeared into the rock, old but intact. Whoever built this hadn't been thinking about weekend recreation. They'd been thinking about traffic, weight, repetition, serious use. A low engine rumble drew my attention. Across the marina, a trawler eased into a slip with practiced ease. The captain killed the throttle and stood, stretching his back before securing a line. When he looked up and saw me, he paused. Then he nodded. Not a neighborly wave, not a tourist's curiosity. Recognition. I felt a prickle crawl up my arms. As twilight thickened, more boats returned. A charter vessel slid past the pier, its hull scarred and repainted so many times it looked like a history of work etched into steel. The captain tipped his cap at me as he passed, eyes lingering a second longer than polite. You the new owner? He called. I am, I replied. Good, he said. And then the boat was gone, engine fading into the dark. Good. Not welcome. Not nice place. Good. I stayed out there until the lake reflected nothing but stars and distant dock lights. When I finally went inside, I didn't turn on the television. I spread paperwork across the dining table instead. Deed, survey, closing statement. Old documents I hadn't paid much attention to because I trusted the professionals who told me everything was clean. One envelope was heavier than the rest. Inside was a ring of keys. Thick, mismatched, worn smooth from decades of use. I'd assumed they were leftovers from sheds or storage lockers. Now I laid them out, one by one. Some were stamped with numbers, others with faded paint marks. A few were clearly marine grade, the kind meant to survive salt and weather. Alongside them was a folded sheet of paper I hadn't unfolded before. The edges were soft, creased from being opened and closed too many times. Riparian and mooring rights. Transfer summary. I read it once, slowly. Then again. The language was careful, almost cautious. Shoreline access, mooring privileges, maintenance obligations, rights that extended beyond the visible boundary of the land itself and into the water. Rights that didn't disappear just because someone nearby decided they didn't like how things looked. The previous owner had mentioned her late husband handled the water side of things. She'd laughed it off, embarrassed, like it was a hobby she never bothered to understand. This didn't read like a hobby. This read like infrastructure. I stepped out onto the deck again, the cool night air settling on my skin. The marina lights reflected off the water in long, broken lines. Somewhere, a dock gate clanged shut. A breeze rattled palm fronds, sending dry whispers across the yard. Bethany's words replayed in my head. Marina access is common area, always has been. But if that were true, why had no one challenged the pier before? Why had boat captains treated it like a working dock? Why did the paperwork talk about rights that predated the neighborhood itself? And why did Bethany need to be so aggressive, so fast? I felt the shift then, not fear, not anger, but clarity. The sense that I'd been dropped into a fight that wasn't really about aesthetics or safety or community standards. It was about control. Someone had been collecting authority they didn't own, enforcing rules that didn't belong to them, and betting that no one would ever look too closely. I looked back down at the pier, solid and quiet beneath the night sky. Something about it didn't add up, and I was done pretending that was an accident. I brought the ring of keys out onto the kitchen table and spread them beneath the overhead light. They clinked softly against the wood, 30 or so in all, different shapes, different metals, each worn in a way that told its own story. These weren't spare house keys. They were working keys, dock gates, utility boxes, storage cages, the kind of keys that don't belong to a single man unless that man has responsibility. I picked one up, heavy and pitted, stamped with a faded number. Another had a strip of blue paint worn thin at the edges. A third was marine brass, the teeth polished smooth by years of use. I lined them up beside the folded document I'd just read for the third time. Riparian and mooring rights, transfer summary. The language was precise, careful. It didn't brag. It didn't threaten. It simply stated facts that had existed long before Bethany Reed ever learned the word bylaw. Shoreline rights extended beyond the visible boundary of the land. Mooring privileges attached to the property, not the neighborhood. Maintenance obligations assigned to the owner of record. Owner of record. That phrase stuck with me. I poured a cup of coffee even though it was late and sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant slap of water against stone. Outside, the marina lights flickered gently, reflecting in long, broken lines across the lake. Somewhere out there, people were locking up boats, finishing workdays, heading home. And all of them seemed to understand something the HOA president didn't. The next morning, I started early. I walked the shoreline with the keys in my pocket, dew soaking the cuffs of my jeans. The sun crept up over the hills, lighting the water in bands of gold and green. I stopped at the edge of the pier and studied the base again. Stone fitted deep into the lakebed, reinforced with steel where the waterline met rock. This pier wasn't decorative, it was foundational. I followed the shoreline to a small, weathered gate set back near the tree line. No sign, no HOA logo, just a padlock, old but solid. On a hunch, I tried one of the keys. It turned. The gate swung open with a low creak, revealing a narrow path leading down to a utility shed I hadn't noticed before, tucked discreetly behind a stand of palms. Inside were breakers, meters and valves, labeled, organized, maintained. A laminated placard on the wall listed inspection dates going back more than a decade. None of them were recent. None of them bore the HOA's name. By mid-morning, the Marina was awake. Engines rumbled, lines creaked, voices carried across the water. I walked down the pier just as a small charter boat eased in, its hull scarred from real work. The captain killed the engine and stepped onto the dock with practiced ease. "You're the new owner," he said, not asking. "I am." He wiped his hands on a rag and glanced at the pier beneath his boots. "Good to see someone finally back in charge. I felt my chest tighten slightly. "You worked with the previous owner?" "Worked for him," the captain said. "For years. Good man. Kept things running smooth." "Things?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment, then frowned. "They didn't tell you?" "Tell me what?" His brow creased. "About the slips, fuel access, maintenance contracts." He stopped himself, studying my face. "You might want to talk to whoever handled the legal side of your purchase." I nodded, thanked him, and watched as he walked away. The words echoed long after the boat drifted off. Fuel access, maintenance contracts. Back inside, I spread everything out again. Keys, deed, transfer summary, survey maps. I called the real estate agent, straight to voicemail. I left a message that was polite, short, and very specific. Then I made the call I'd been putting off since the night before. Sarah Mitchell answered on the second ring. "Sarah Mitchell," she said, voice steady, alert. "Sarah, this is Remy," I said. "You handled my land use review before closing." There was a pause. "Is something wrong?" "I think something was missed," I replied. "And I think an HOA just threatened to tear down a pier they don't own." Another pause. Longer this time. "Send me everything," she said finally. "Deed, surveys, anything tied to shoreline or water access." "I will," I said. "There's more." "More usually is," she replied. "Give me an hour." I hung up and looked out at the lake again. A breeze rippled the surface, bending reflections into abstract shapes. The pier stood firm, unmoved by threats or paperwork. Bethany thought this was about aesthetics, about control, about pushing a newcomer until he folded. She had no idea about the keys, and she had no idea what those keys unlocked. By late morning, the lake had settled into a deceptive calm. Sunlight broke through thin clouds and scattered across the water, turning it into a sheet of broken glass. The marina looked almost celebratory, boats rocking gently, flags snapping softly, a couple unloading coolers for a day on the water. If you didn't know what was coming, you'd think nothing in the world was wrong. I knew better. The first sound was the truck, not the soft crunch of gravel this time, but the heavy grind of tires stopping fast. Then doors, voices, the kind that carry when people expect to be obeyed. I stepped out onto the deck just as Bethany Reed marched back onto my property, brighter than ever in that pink suit, clipboard tucked under her arm like a warrant. Behind her came Jake Mercer, flanked by another worker carrying measuring equipment, and the same woman with the camera, this time wearing a vest that read Compliance Review in block letters. They didn't wait to be invited. Bethany didn't even look at me at first. She scanned the pier, eyes narrowing, as if she'd already decided how this would end. "We've reviewed the structure," she announced loudly, voice echoing off the stone and water. "And we've determined it poses an immediate safety hazard." Jake shifted his weight, glancing from the pier to me. His jaw tightened. Bethany pointed sharply at a cracked stone near the waterline. "Loose masonry. Improper reinforcement. This pier could fail." "It's been standing for decades," I said calmly. "Decades of neglect," she snapped back, "which makes it even more dangerous." The camera whirred as the woman crouched low, filming the crack, the water lapping gently against the stone like it had done every day for years without incident. Bethany turned toward me then, satisfaction flickering across her face. "Under emergency provisions of the HOA bylaws, we're authorized to schedule immediate demolition to protect the community." She held up a new document, already signed. "Today," she said. The word hung there, heavy. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step toward her. I reached into my pocket instead and pulled out my phone. "Before you do anything," I said, "I want you to state clearly on camera who authorized this." Bethany smiled, the kind of smile meant for audiences. "The Coastal Haven Homeowners Association." "And what authority are you claiming?" I asked. She tilted her chin up slightly. "Marina access and shoreline safety." "On my property," I said. She waved a dismissive hand. "You don't own the marina." Jake Mercer cleared his throat. "Bethany," she shot him a look, "this doesn't concern you." "It does if you're asking me to tear something down without a permit," he said carefully. Bethany's head snapped toward him. "The HOA permit is sufficient." "For private property?" Jake asked. The camera caught everything, the hesitation, the tension, the flicker of doubt that crossed Bethany's face before she masked it with anger. "You're overthinking this," she snapped. "This is routine." I stepped aside and gestured toward the pier. "Go ahead. Tell your contractor to start." Bethany hesitated, just for a beat. Jake looked at the pier again, then at me. "I need written confirmation of jurisdiction," he said. "County level, not HOA letterhead." Bethany's voice rose. "You are authorized by—" "By you," Jake interrupted quietly. "And that's not enough." Silence spread across the pier like oil. A couple of boat owners had stopped what they were doing, watching from their slips. Someone on the far dock leaned against a piling, arms crossed. Bethany realized she was losing control of the moment. "Fine," she snapped. "Document it. We'll proceed through legal channels." She turned to the camera woman. "Make sure you capture the condition of the pier. We'll need evidence." The woman nodded, zooming in again. I turned my own camera on then, the small security unit mounted discreetly beneath the eaves, its red light blinking to life. Bethany noticed it immediately. "Are you recording me?" she demanded. "Yes," I said. "On my property." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes darted briefly to the workers, to the boats watching, to the lake that refused to back her up. "We're not done," she said tightly. "This is far from over." She spun on her heel and marched back toward the path, heels striking stone with less confidence than before. Jake lingered, giving the pier one last look. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "this doesn't smell right." "I know," I replied. The trucks pulled away again, slower this time. Less dust, less certainty. I stayed on the pier, listening to the water, watching the camera's red light blink steadily. Somewhere behind me, my phone buzzed with an incoming message. From Sarah. "We need to talk, immediately." I didn't open it right away. I stood there a moment longer, letting the lake settle back into itself. The wind had shifted, cooler now, pushing small waves against the stone with a hollow, rhythmic sound. A sailboat creaked against its lines across the marina. Somewhere far off, a gate clanged shut, metal on metal, sharp and final. Then I unlocked my phone. Sarah Mitchell. Do not respond to the HOA. Do not argue. Do not post. We need to go quiet. That was it. No greeting, no softening, just instructions. I walked back inside and closed the glass doors, the latch clicking softly behind me. The house felt different now, not invaded, but fortified. I spread the documents across the dining table again, but this time with purpose. Deed, survey, transfer summary, photos of the pier, screenshots of Bethany's notices, the security footage I'd already backed up twice. An hour later, Sarah called. "Sit down," she said as soon as I answered. "I am." "Good, because what you sent me is bigger than a pier." I could hear papers shuffling on her end, a printer humming, the muted sounds of an office that had shifted from routine to focus. "The shoreline survey attached to your deed," she continued, "extends beyond the visible boundary of the land. That's normal for waterfront properties. What isn't normal is how cleanly it aligns with historic marina easements." I leaned back in the chair, eyes drifting to the window. "Meaning?" "Meaning your property wasn't just designed to touch the marina," she said. "It was designed to support it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your pier isn't a personal accessory. It's infrastructure." That word again. Infrastructure. Sarah went on. "The HOA bylaws Bethany cited? They reference a marina access map that appears to have been revised. The version they're enforcing doesn't match the county's recorded plats." I closed my eyes briefly. "So they changed it." "They tried to," Sarah said, "or they're using an internal document that has no legal authority." I pictured Bethany's clipboard, the confidence, the way she'd spoken like the law followed her voice. "What do we do?" I asked. "We don't poke the bear," Sarah replied. "Not yet. We document. We pull historical leases. We request county records. We let them make the next mistake." Outside, clouds rolled in again, darkening the lake to a deep slate color. A breeze rattled the palms along the lawn, sending dry leaves skittering across the deck. "And Remy," Sarah added, her voice firm, "if they threaten demolition again, you do not stop them physically. You let the cameras roll. You let them hang themselves with procedure." After we hung up, I did exactly what she said. I went silent. No emails, no calls, no HOA meetings. When Bethany sent another notice, this one more aggressive, more urgent, I archived it without response. When a neighbor knocked, asking what was going on, I smiled politely and said lawyers were handling it. Behind the scenes, the work accelerated. Sarah's team pulled county plats going back 40 years. They found maintenance logs tied to my property address but labeled under a defunct marina entity. They traced shoreline easements that predated the neighborhood itself. Names appeared again and again. Surveyors, inspectors, operators, none of them tied to the HOA. Late one evening, Marcus Hale, the neighbor from 2 houses down, wandered over while I was reviewing documents on the deck. "Word is Bethany's furious," he said quietly. "She's telling people you're hiding something." I looked out at the lake, the marina lights shimmering like broken stars. "I am," I said. "Just not the thing she thinks." Marcus nodded slowly. "Figures. She's been collecting marina fees from residents for years. No one ever knew where they went." That caught my attention. "Fees?" He shrugged. "Access, maintenance, waterfront preservation, whatever name she slapped on it." After he left, I wrote that down and sent a single line to Sarah. "Ask about HOA marina fees." Her reply came back almost instantly. "Already did." "And Remy?" "That's where this stops being small." I sat back in the chair, the weight of it settling in. The pier outside stood unchanged, solid against the dark water. The lake didn't care about bylaws or pink suits or intimidation tactics. It waited. And so did I. The call from Sarah came just after sunrise. Her voice was different this time. Not urgent, not cautious. Focused in a way that made every word land heavier than the last. "Remy," she said, "I need you to listen carefully." I stood at the window as she spoke, watching mist lift off the lake in slow ribbons. The marina was quiet, boats still, water smooth as steel. "The pier is not the story," she continued. "It never was." I said nothing. "We pulled the historical chain of title last night. Not just your parcel, the surrounding shoreline. What we found goes back decades, before Coastal Haven existed." She paused, letting that sink in. "Your property was the operational anchor for a privately deeded marina. Fuel access, mooring rights, maintenance corridors. Everything tied to the water runs through your land." I closed my eyes. "The HOA neighborhood," she said, "was built later, on leased shoreline access." Leased. "They don't own the marina," Sarah said. "They never did. They were granted limited access rights, revocable rights, under agreements that attached to the marina owner." My grip tightened on the window frame. The glass was cool under my palm. "Bethany Reed isn't enforcing rules," Sarah continued. "She's trespassing. And worse, she's been collecting marina-related fees without standing." The image of Bethany's clipboard flashed through my mind. The confidence, the certainty, the way she spoke as if the lake itself answered to hers. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yes," Sarah said. "I'm looking at the documents right now." She listed them calmly, methodically. Recorded easements, lease agreements, maintenance obligations assigned to a marina entity that no longer existed, except it did. It existed now, because I owned the land it was tied to. "Your deed absorbed it," she said. "All of it." I looked out at the pier again, at the cleats, the power lines, the stone blocks fitted deep into the water. Infrastructure. The realization hit slowly, then all at once. Bethany hadn't come after my pier because it was ugly. She'd come after it because it was leverage. "She knows something's wrong," I said. "Yes," Sarah replied, "and she's panicking." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a new message. "Emergency HOA meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m. Sarah exhaled softly. "There it is." I read the message again. "Emergency. Tonight. No agenda listed." "She's trying to force a public vote before this comes out," Sarah said. "She wants momentum. Fear." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "You attend," she said. "You say nothing. And you let me do the talking." That evening, the community center was packed. Cars lined the road. People clustered in small groups, voices low, anxious. When I walked in, conversations paused. Eyes followed me, some curious, some hostile, some relieved, like they were hoping I'd explain something they couldn't quite understand. Bethany stood at the front of the room in that same pink suit, posture rigid, jaw set. Beside her sat a man in a dark blazer with a legal pad on his lap. Her attorney, I assumed. He didn't look comfortable. She began immediately. "This community is under threat," she declared. "From unauthorized commercial activity. From illegal marina operations conducted by an outside party who refuses to comply." Murmurs rippled through the room. She clicked a remote, and photos of my pier flashed on the screen. Cracks, cleats, boats. "This structure endangers property values and safety," Bethany continued. "And we will not allow it." Her attorney cleared his throat and began explaining marina regulations in vague, sweeping terms. Heads nodded, people whispered. Then Sarah stood, She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. She simply walked to the front, placed a thick folder on the table, and looked out at the room. "Before you vote on anything," she said calmly, "you should understand who owns the marina." The room stilled. Bethany's face tightened. "This is not—" "It is exactly what this is about," Sarah replied. She opened the folder and laid out a large map, unfolding it slowly. Red lines marked boundaries most people in the room had never seen. "This," Sarah said, pointing, "is the privately deeded marina. And this," she continued, shifting the pointer, "is Coastal Haven." A murmur rose, louder this time. "The marina predates this neighborhood," Sarah said, "and the access you've enjoyed for years exists under lease from the marina owner." Bethany stood abruptly. "That's absurd." Sarah looked at her evenly. "Then you should have checked the county records." She turned back to the room. "Mr. Cole owns the marina, including the pier, including the water access this community depends on." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Bethany's attorney flipped through his notes, color draining from his face. Someone in the back spoke up. "Does that mean—" "Yes," Sarah said. "This HOA does not control the marina." Bethany opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for support that wasn't there. The truth had finally surfaced, and it was bigger than any of us expected. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The kind of silence that presses against your ears. Chairs creaked as people shifted uncomfortably. Someone dropped a pen, the sharp clatter echoing far louder than it should have in the packed community hall. Bethany was the first to recover. "This is a gross misrepresentation," she snapped, her voice cutting through the room. "Selective documents, outdated agreements. None of this has been validated in court." Her attorney swallowed and leaned toward her, whispering urgently. She brushed him off with a sharp shake of her head. "You're telling these people," Bethany continued, turning toward the crowd, "that everything they've been told for years is suddenly wrong? That their HOA has no authority over the waterfront?" Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look at Bethany. "I'm telling them the county records say exactly that," she replied. "And I'm telling them those records are enforceable." A murmur rolled through the room, louder now, anger mixed with confusion. People looked at one another, recalculating memories, fees paid, rules enforced, warnings issued over the years. A man in the second row stood up. "We've been paying marina maintenance fees for over a decade." "Yes," Sarah said, finally looking at him. "You have." "And if the HOA doesn't control the marina?" another woman asked, voice shaking. "Where did that money go?" Every head in the room turned toward Bethany. She stiffened. Those funds were allocated appropriately. "Allocated to whom?" Sarah asked calmly. Bethany hesitated, just a fraction too long. Her attorney stood abruptly. "I think we need to pause this meeting," he said, voice tight. "There are legal complexities here that—" "Sit down," Bethany snapped. He didn't. Instead, he stepped back, distancing himself by inches that might as well have been miles. Sarah opened another folder and placed it gently on the table. "HOA financial disclosures," she said. "Public filings. We requested them this afternoon." Bethany's face drained of color. "These documents show marina-related fees collected under the HOA's authority," Sarah continued. "They do not show corresponding expenditures to any marina entity." The room erupted. People stood. Voices overlapped. Questions flew from every direction. Someone shouted about fraud. Someone else demanded refunds. A woman near the back clutched her purse like it might anchor her to the chair. I stayed seated. I hadn't come here to shout. I hadn't come here to posture. I watched Bethany instead. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked small. "This is a witch hunt," she said, but her voice lacked force. "You're all overreacting." "No," Sarah replied. "You're underestimating the consequences." She turned to the room. "Interfering with marina operations without authority, issuing enforcement notices on private property, threatening demolition without jurisdiction, collecting fees under false pretenses." She paused. "Each of these carries personal liability." That word landed hard. Personal. Bethany's attorney finally spoke again, his voice strained. "Mrs. Reed, we need to step outside." "No," Bethany said. "I am not backing down." But the room had already shifted. People weren't looking at her anymore. They were looking at me. At the quiet man who had moved in 3 weeks earlier and somehow pulled a thread that unraveled years of assumed control. I stood then, slowly. "I didn't come here to take anything away from this community," I said. My voice carried without effort. "I came here to live quietly on my property." I gestured toward the map still displayed on the table. "But I won't be threatened or have my land taken because someone decided authority was easier than truth." The room fell silent again, different this time, focused, listening. Bethany's hands clenched at her sides. "You can't prove any of this tonight." Sarah closed the folder with a soft, final sound. "We don't need to," she said. "The proof already exists." A knock echoed at the back of the room, firm, deliberate. Heads turned as the double doors opened. 2 uniformed figures stepped inside. And that was when Bethany realized this meeting was no longer under her control. The room went still in a way that felt physical, like the air had thickened. The first officer scanned the crowd calmly, hand resting near his belt, eyes alert, but not aggressive. The second followed, older, broader, carrying a slim leather folder tucked under one arm. "Evening," the older officer said, his voice measured and clear. "We're looking for Bethany Reed." Every head turned. Bethany straightened her shoulders as if she could physically push the moment away. "On what grounds?" she demanded. The officer glanced down at the folder, then back up. "We received a request to be present due to a potential civil dispute involving property access, financial misrepresentation, and interference with lawful use." He paused. "And because there was concern this meeting might escalate without neutral oversight." A murmur rippled through the room again, lower this time, edged with something like relief. Sarah stepped forward. "Thank you for coming, Sheriff." The word landed like a dropped plate. Bethany's attorney flinched. The sheriff nodded to Sarah, then looked at Bethany. "Ma'am, we're not here to arrest anyone tonight. We're here to ensure the facts are presented accurately and no further unlawful actions occur." Bethany scoffed, but it sounded brittle. "This is harassment." "No," the sheriff replied evenly. "This is documentation." Sarah moved to the table and lifted a single document from her stack. Not the thick folder, not the maps, just one page. She placed it flat on the table and slid it forward. "This," said, "is the deed." The paper didn't look dramatic. No seals, no color, just clean, precise text and a county stamp at the bottom. But the effect was immediate. Sarah turned it so the room could see. "Read the highlighted section," she said. The sheriff leaned in first, scanning the lines. His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "Together with all appurtenant riparian rights, marina easements, mooring privileges, and operational access historically attached to the parcel," he read aloud. A woman in the front row whispered, "Oh my God." Sarah continued, "This deed was recorded 3 weeks ago. It transferred ownership of the marina infrastructure, explicitly. That includes the pier, the slips, and the access routes your HOA has been claiming control over." Bethany shook her head, more desperately now. That can't be right. The HOA has been leasing access, Sarah interrupted. Not owning it. She pulled another document, this one older, yellowed at the edges. This is the lease agreement between the marina operator and the developer who built Coastal Haven. It granted conditional access to residents. It did not grant ownership, and it certainly did not grant enforcement authority. The sheriff looked up. Meaning, Sarah said, that the HOA has no legal standing to issue violations, collect marina fees, or threaten demolition. Bethany's attorney finally spoke, his voice barely steady. Mrs. Reed, you told me the HOA owned the marina outright. Bethany's mouth opened, then closed again. The sheriff flipped to another page in his folder. We also received preliminary documentation suggesting marina-related fees collected by the HOA were not remitted to the marina owner. The room erupted. Where did the money go? You told us it was for maintenance. We paid every year. Bethany raised her hand, trying to regain control. This is getting out of hand. No, the sheriff said quietly. This is getting clear. He turned to Sarah. At this point, what are you asking for? Sarah didn't hesitate. An immediate cessation of HOA enforcement actions related to the marina, written acknowledgement of ownership, and preservation of all HOA financial records pending further review. The sheriff nodded once. That's reasonable. He looked back at Bethany. Ma'am, I strongly advise you to comply. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with realization, with recalculation, with the sound of a structure collapsing, not physically, but legally. Bethany's shoulders sagged just slightly, enough to be noticed. This meeting is adjourned, she said weakly. No, the sheriff replied. It's concluded. People stood slowly, talking in hushed tones. Some avoided Bethany's gaze. Others stared openly, anger simmering just beneath the surface. I remained seated until the room thinned, then stood and walked to the table. I looked at the deed one last time before Sarah slid it back into her folder. Paper, ink, truth. Bethany had built her power on noise and assumption. Tonight, it ended on a single page. People stood slowly, talking in hushed tones. Some avoided Bethany's gaze. Others stared openly, anger simmering just beneath the surface. I remained seated until the room thinned, then stood and walked to the table. I looked at the deed one last time before Sarah slid it back into her folder. Paper, ink, truth. Bethany had built her power on noise and assumption. Tonight, it ended on a single page. The aftermath didn't explode the way Bethany always had. It collapsed quietly. Her attorney was the first to leave, briefcase tucked tight against his side, eyes fixed straight ahead as if distance alone could separate him from the damage already done. Board members followed, whispering urgently to one another, their authority dissolving with every step away from the table. Bethany stayed behind. She stood rigid, hands braced on the back of a chair, staring at the empty screen where her photos had been moments earlier. The pink suit looked out of place now, too loud, too defiant for a room that had moved on without her. The sheriff approached her calmly. Ma'am, you'll be receiving formal notice. You are not to issue further HOA directives regarding the marina or shoreline. Bethany didn't respond. And I strongly suggest, he added, that you retain separate counsel. That got her attention. Her chin lifted, but the fire was gone. This isn't over, she said, though the words sounded practiced, hollow. The sheriff met her eyes. For you? It probably is. Outside, the night had cooled. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the pavement as people dispersed in small groups. Conversations followed me as I walked past. Some apologetic, some curious, some grateful. One woman stopped me near the door. "We didn't know," she said quietly. "About the fees. About the marina." "I know," I replied. "That's why I didn't come here to punish anyone." She nodded, relief softening her shoulders. Over the next week, everything moved quickly, but not loudly. Bethany submitted her resignation for personal reasons 2 days later. The HOA board accepted it without comment. A temporary president was appointed, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Chen, who opened her first email to residents with the words, "We are reviewing all prior assumptions." Sarah negotiated the settlement with precision. The HOA acknowledged my ownership of the marina and pier in writing, agreed to cease all enforcement actions related to the waterfront, and committed to an independent audit of marina-related fees. Bethany, personally, agreed to reimburse a portion of the misallocated funds and signed a binding agreement barring her from further HOA leadership. No court, no spectacle, just consequences. The sheriff's office closed its file once compliance was confirmed. County records were updated, maps corrected. The marina's status, mine, was finally reflected everywhere it mattered. On a quiet Friday evening, I returned to the pier alone. The stone was still cool under my feet. The cracks Bethany had tried to weaponize caught the last light of the setting sun, filled with gold instead of threat. Boats drifted gently in their slips. A couple of kayaks passed by, laughter carrying softly over the water. I installed a new sign at the head of the pier that afternoon. Simple. Clean. Private marina authorized access only, no insults, no warnings, just fact. Marcus Hale wandered over as I tightened the last bolt. "Looks good," he said. "Different energy around here now." "Truth has a way of changing that," I replied. Down the shoreline, I noticed a familiar figure standing beyond the gate. Bethany. No suit this time. Just dark clothes, arms folded, watching the marina she'd once claimed as hers. She didn't shout. She didn't approach. She simply turned and walked away. The lake didn't react. It never had. As the sun dipped below the hills, I sat at the edge of the pier and let the quiet settle properly for the first time. Not borrowed. Not threatened. Earned. I hadn't won by yelling louder or pushing harder. I hadn't needed to humiliate anyone publicly or tear anything down. All I'd done was read the paper they hoped no one would ever open. And in the end, that was enough. If you've ever dealt with an HOA or someone who thought they had power they didn't, drop a justice in the comments, or type yes if you'd stand your ground too. Sometimes real strength isn't about raising your voice. It's about knowing the truth and holding your ground when it matters. If stories like this mean something to you, consider subscribing and staying with us. There are more true land justice and HOA stories ahead, and you're always welcome here.